Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I oftentimes quote some of the experts out there, Casey Butt, Lyle McDonald, some of these other people who have put out a pretty good amount of data. I've linked a lot of it in the past, it's all easy to find, stating that the fat-free mass index for a drug-free, genetically gifted bodybuilder when they're under 10% body fat is going to be about 25. That's going to be the upper threshold, and anything above that you can pretty much look at and say, okay, that's drugs. Now, again, remember that's under 10% body fat. Just because you have a really fat sumo wrestler with a DEXA scan who comes back 27 is not the same thing. Even a guy 16, 17%, not the same thing. But yeah, I had a subscriber bring up the point of what about Eugene Sandow? He came back like 27 on the charts. His stats and stuff are everywhere. What do you think of that? Doesn't that dispel it? So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about it. Cliff notes for people who don't like these long videos, basically. Basically, there's no reason to believe the published stats of Eugene Sandow are accurate when you can look at him. You can look at him and tell a lot of the measurements have been greatly embellished for legendary purposes from 100 years ago. They've been greatly embellished. When you look at photographs, sorry, it doesn't add up. Also, I'm going to discuss a little bit about the genetic end of it too. Of even people will say, well, there's exceptions based on genetics. Actually, I'm going to cover why the elite genetics is already kind of covered there. Particularly when people bring up things like ethnicity, that just blows my mind. They act like black people weren't included in the original data or something, and they'll always bring up race or something. There were plenty of black people in that data living in America whose ancestors were slaves. So you can't pull that card. There were dozens of them included in that research. It was already done. So, not going to fly. They're already included. That's where you get your 25s from. Alright, so for people who want a little more data. Alright guys, I'm going to flip in at least one or two pictures here of Eugene Sandow. Now look at him. His published stats that were recorded 100 years ago or over 100 years ago claim that he was 5'10", 202 pounds there. That's probably 9 to 10% body fat in most of those. There are tons of other photos you can find of him out there. Tons of other photos. But the thing that's interesting, look at his measurements. They're claiming a 48-inch chest, 18.5-inch arms, and an 18-inch neck. His arms measured a half-inch bigger than his neck, supposedly. In any of those photos, do his arms look as big as his neck? They look even close to as big as his neck. If he's got an 18-inch neck, he has maybe 15-inch arms. And that's nothing to scoff at. A 15-inch drug-free arm on someone who's really lean is actually not bad at all. That's actually not bad. That's pretty good. For someone who's completely natural and really lean like that, because the dude's ripped. So that's actually pretty reasonable. That's good. But 18.5, I don't think so. They're way smaller than his neck even flexed. No way that's 18.5. 48-inch chest. Look at the size of my head versus my chest. My chest is like 50 inches. I have a 50-inch chest, approximately. My head versus the thickness of my torso. Now, you can argue whether there's muscle or fat, there's irrelevant. Inches are still inches. Ratio is ratio, whether it's air, water, fat, muscle, or plutonium. Doesn't matter. An inch is still an inch. All right, 48-inch chest? Oh, I don't think so. So the thing is, when you look at his overall dimensions, I'm sorry, guys under 6 foot tall, who are 200 plus pounds, I've known many of them in my life lifting. Many of them. I've never seen a 200-pound man that looked that small in my entire life. In fact, I've never seen a 200-pound man. I've never seen a 190-pound man who was lean like that with proportions that small. I have never seen a chest and set of arms that small on a 190-pound man who is 10% body fat or lower. I think 185 would be pushing it. I don't even think he's 185 pounds in those photos. I'd put him at 170 tops. So there's your problem. And people say, well, you know, all these measurements and this say that. Well, you know what? We have legends talking about Paul Bunyan of how when he swung an axe, he cut down 10 trees at one time and he had a big blue ox named Babe. It's all in the history. It's all in our history legends, documented. How about George Washington here in America? You know, the whole thing about him cutting down a cherry tree and then telling his father, you know, I cannot tell a lie when he asked about it, I cut down your cherry tree, and he wasn't punished for being so honest. That's actually not real. That's a myth. That's not a true story. So, guys, these are myths and legends. People recorded this, but the thing is, you can look at the photographs and the documentation you have, and you can clearly see that guy has proportions way smaller than what he's reported to have had. And he weighs a lot less than he's reported to have weighed. And you know what? That's how myths and legends work, because he was a legendary figure in the strongman world and the weightlifting world. He's a legendary figure, so they gave him legendary numbers. In fact, they gave him numbers that are decently impressive still by today's standards. They gave him numbers that when you look at his body fat there, if those measurements, body weight, arm, chest, waist measurements, all that were accurate, he would be impressive by modest steroid standards. Most steroid users aren't that big. The average steroid user isn't. In fact, let's go over to the point of all of that. When it comes to these legends and you compare them today, the average steroid user has a fat-free mass index of around 24.5. Think about that for a minute. All these guys are lifting weights out of guys who have admitted to using steroids for at least a year, and surveys and studies that have been done, who lift weights regularly, go to a gym, have been using steroids at least a year. The average fat-free mass index is 24.5. That is still under the natural limit for the genetic elite. You got to think about that for a minute. People say, well, this person or that could hit 27 or 28, blah, blah, blah. They've got great genetics. So they'll try to claim black genetics. And they're like, so black guys are just always bigger. That's not true. First of all, it actually isn't true. When you go study the athletic genes there, the data I've seen suggests that because of certain things in their ancestry, because of the hardships of slavery, African Americans here in the United States have a slightly higher propensity for elite genetics than other ethnic groups. By slightly higher, that means that something like 3%. 3% of black men in the United States have amazing genetics for gaining muscle strength, athleticism, compared to only 1% to 1.5% for Caucasians. So you're talking double to triple the rate, which is impressive. That is enough to skew and create a stereotype. But that doesn't make the stereotype true across the board. And that's what you have to remember there. And also, all these studies done on pre-steroid era bodybuilders, when they pulled all these numbers, you need to remember steroids were in circulation at that time. They just weren't popularly known to be so. But there's data showing they were. And that's something I should cover later. I pulled up a bunch of stuff a long time ago showing steroids being sold in publications as early as the early 1940s. Like in, Popular Science magazine. Right there, ads in the back. They were selling methyl testosterone and stuff. Right there to invigorate your sex drive and everything and your libido. There's plenty of data showing this stuff goes back further than 1954 when it hit the scene. Now, all these data we have, though, when you look at it, go look at the names of the guys in that era. There were a lot of African-American bodybuilders being accepted in the community. A lot of them made it into that research. All right, and the ones who were competing in bodybuilding successfully at that time probably had better genetics than the average person of their same ethnic group. You're dealing with the genetically gifted. They're already accounted for. So when someone says that and they say, well, this person could probably exceed those numbers because they're black. Black men were studied in there already. So where are you getting this? I mean, it just doesn't fly. That excuse doesn't work. You can't use that as an excuse to say the guy he could still be natural because of his skin color. But that group is already in that data that I've discussed. Your only era of guys who were probably drug-free, you've already got them included. They were making up like 1 in 5 of the top bodybuilders already. They were there. So people act like they weren't included in these numbers. And that's what makes it insane. But ultimately, yeah, these numbers are reasonable. They're extremely reasonable because the guys back then really did know how to train. And the thing you also have to factor in, they weren't getting as lean. They were getting 9-10% body fat at the absolute leanest. When you go even under that, we could argue that technically your fat-free mass index should go even lower because you can't maintain your muscle. So in all honesty, it's going to be harder, even though people argue, well, we know more about training and nutrition today. I don't want to hear anything about supplements because supplements don't do anything, so the supplement knowledge doesn't matter. But, we know more about training and nutrition today, a bit more, so maybe they can gain a little more. Yeah, but you're also asking these guys to get even leaner and more ripped. When you start doing that, they're going to lose more muscle no matter what. All the data shows that. You don't maintain all your muscle when you start getting under 10% body fat, no matter how careful you are, without a lot of drugs coming into play. So these guys should technically have an even lower fat-free mass index than the 25 because they're cutting even leaner than the guys were in these studies. That's more than enough to offset any benefit as far as better training and nutrition knowledge go, the extra pounds of muscle they're going to lose from the cutting. So ultimately today, this idea that people want to throw out this fat-free mass index as a valuable tool, and they make excuses for it. They make excuses of, oh, well, this person's black, so therefore, and that's the biggest one. That's the biggest one you see all the time, and I get it in my own comments and arguments. They try to make that excuse, and that's not valid because the data already included black people. So even if you wanted to argue that this group is more genetically gifted as a whole, which doesn't appear to be true, they're already accounted for. They're already in the data. So that excuse doesn't fly. And then they start in with the, well, you know, we know more about training and nutrition. And you know what, guys? Ultimately, what it comes down to is that people don't want to admit the truth. That their heroes, the people they look up to, the people they're getting advice from, who claim to be natural, who are on drugs, they don't want to accept the fact that they're liars. All right, that's what it comes down to. And you know, the truth of the matter is, because drugs are so easy to get today, they're so prevalent today, and so many people lie about it, particularly when their career and their money depends upon them lying about it. Think about it. These guys make their living based upon lying on it, oftentimes lying about it. Why would they admit to it? Why wouldn't they lie about it? So you have no way to really prove that they're telling the truth, and that's unfortunate. And people will say, well, you can't prove they're lying either. Sure you can. You can pull their fat-free mass index and look at it and come to a reasonable conclusion. A reasonable conclusion. Because you know what, guys? When you're deciding who you're going to get advice from, who you're going to get information from, who you're going to buy products from, you don't need to convict them of something and throw them in prison. This isn't a court of law. This is a court of common sense. And if you're going to buy a product from someone based upon their natural status, and the preponderance of the evidence suggests they might not be natty, that's all you need to make your decision with what to do with your purchasing power. That's all you need to do to make your decision to decide if you're going to listen to them when they're using their personal anecdote as evidence. It's one thing if they're producing evidence from studies or from coaching hundreds of people over the years, or they've got other data out there. That's one thing. It's another thing when they're using their personal anecdote. When guys are using their personal anecdote, and you can use a little preponderance of the evidence to say, yeah, do I want to take their advice or not on how to train for a natural lifter or how to eat for a natural lifter based upon their personal anecdote, when there's at least a 50% chance they're lying to me about being natural. That's what that comes down to. You can decide at that point, no, I think maybe I'm going to look for a second opinion on this advice. Maybe I don't want to accept their opinion and their anecdote at face value. I'm going to go double check it. That's all you're doing. Same thing. Well, maybe I don't want to buy their special protein powder with branched chain amino acids added in an extra leucine, even though they claim it helped them and they're natural, because it looks like there's a good chance they might not be. So I'm not going to buy that product. You know what, guys? That's not convicting anyone of anything. That's not putting someone in prison. That's not finding them guilty of a crime and putting a felony on their record. That is using common fucking sense with your own money and your own body and your own life based upon the fact, you know what, this guy might not actually be natural. He's probably not. Good chance he's not. I don't want to use his personal anecdote with no further evidence as my reason to spend my money or to subject my body to something. It's that simple. That's not a court of law. It's a court of common fucking sense of what to do with your own money and your own time and your own philosophies. That's all it is. And, you know, people make such a big deal about it. You know why they make a big deal about it? And they scream about, oh, you know, you can't say that without evidence. You can't accuse them of this. Oh, you're just jealous. You're a hater. Because they have a financial vested interest in that industry. Tons of people out there make their living in this lying, shady industry based upon all these fake natties, all right? Those people have something to lose personally if people wake up to that fact. That's it. That's the only reason they scream and cry about it and scream about proof and act like it's a court of law. They just don't want to lose their money in a shady industry that they're making off of it. And you know what? I'm all for capitalism. I'm very pro-capitalism. And you know what? I think everyone needs to be able to work to make a living too. I don't have a problem with people making a living. There's nothing wrong with that. But you can make a living without working in a shady-ass industry. You don't have to work in a shady-ass industry that scams people and bases everything up on a lie and selling them worthless and useless or even dangerous products to pay your bills. You can actually pay your bills without doing that. It can be done. And so all I'm telling people is that, be aware of the bullshit in this industry. That's it. Be aware of the bullshit in the industry. And remember that a fool and his money shall soon part. And you know what? That's how capitalism works. Capitalism has other people who step in and review things. Independent reviews. Stuff like that. That's how capitalism is supposed to work. There needs to be people who can come in and step in and say, you know what? That's bullshit. That's a bullshit product. Screw that product. Guys, take a closer look at that. Take a closer look at the sales pitch they're throwing to you and use a little bit of common sense here before you decide if you want to buy that or not. Having dissonant voices who have the ability to say that, that is how capitalism works. And other people listen, and then you listen to other people's experiences with it and say, you know what? Yeah, they're right. That was a garbage product. And it's one thing if it's their competitor paying someone to do that. It's another thing when it's a dissonant voice or an independent reviewer looking at it saying, look, this is a bullshit product. That's how capitalism is supposed to work. So I'm not being anti-business or anti-capitalism. I'm saying we're dealing with a whole industry that is as shady as it comes. It provides very little, if anything, of value. And there's better things that people could be spending their money on. It's just that simple. It's all about consumer power and people making informed choices of what they want to do with their money. And calling out the fake natties and tools like the Fat-Free Mass Index are a valuable tool at looking at this particular industry so that people can make informed choices. That's all it is. So that people don't get ripped off, so people can make better choices on how to spend their own money or what to do with their own bodies. It's not about convicting anyone of a crime. And people need to understand that difference. All right, guys, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.